Hello, these are my hands, here is my voice, and in front of me, as usual, we have another seemingly random selection of messy gear strewn about the desk. We'll get into why I've selected each of these items, but really today it's all about the Midicake Arp, which is something that's brand new to me, I hadn't heard of until recently, and maybe it's new to you as well. But it is capable of some cool kind of live play features and has a fun UI that I enjoy using. So today is going to be kind of an ARP madness, if that's an apt kind of comparison to March Madness if you're a basketball person. But ARP madness, let's lean into that and think I planned it, where we talk about, when is an ARP no longer really an ARP? Or how many times can I say the word ARP? And how much random do you really need anyway? But first, let me take my dogs for a walk and I'll unpack that metaphor soon. Quick disclaimer off the top, and actually the first time I really need one, as Midicake sent this to me. They saw some videos I had done and wanted to see what I would do with one of their ARP units, which is pretty cool. It's never happened before. I was a little cautious, so we settled on kind of a loop-op model where no money changed hands, they don't have any say in the videos, and basically I said, if you want to send me one, and I like it, I'll probably end up using it, and it'll feature in some videos here and there. If I don't like it, I won't. And they were fine with those vague terms and still sent me one, which gave me actually confidence in the unit. So with that out of the way, let's make some noise. I guess I should also add that this won't really be a review, so to speak, or even a comprehensive tutorial, more just showing off a couple things that I've been having fun with since I've received this unit, features that I don't really find easily elsewhere. If you want to learn more about specific features, the Midicake YouTube channel is a great resource, as they've done a lot of videos on all the features and the various firmware revisions. If you know me, you know I love my firmware updates, like things like the Deluge, or even going back to the Micro Freaker circuit. They're on version 7 with version 8 being teased and a semi-regular cadence and roadmap of new features to come, which is pretty cool. So maybe you'll see some more firmware update videos focusing on the ARP as time goes on. So back to that dog walking analogy I said off the top and then just kind of let hang. It's just a way I've found helpful to think about the ARP in reference to the other gear here. If you've ever walked a dog or seen a dog being walked, hopefully, you've got your owner, the leash, and the dog. Now, if you've ever seen or been a professional dog walker, you see sometimes they have a belt with a bunch of different leashes clipped to it so they can walk multiple dogs at once, where they are still in control of the direction where everyone's heading, but the dogs all have a bit of independence in terms of how long their leashes are. That sort of helped me wrap my head around this, because in this scenario, or this metaphor, I guess, I'm the dog walker. The Midicake Arp is my multi-leash, and here are my pooches. Now, if this Chihuahua wants to go that way a little bit, I can let it have enough leash, and then this Doberman can go that way a bit with the leash I've allowed it, but they're all following me in the direction I am choosing to go via the notes that I'm playing. So we all stay in key together, but I let them kind of wander enough to make it interesting, and we all have fun together, I guess. So hopefully that makes sense. And helps unlock kind of the function of this as a multi-arpeggiator unit that can send 4 different arpeggiators out to your various gear, depending on how you want to have that set up. Professional dog walker walking a bunch of dogs at once is the way that helped my brain kind of work. I guess another way you could think about it is sort of that kind of old school keyboard accompaniment that you would find in, say, like cheap Casios or Portasounds or whatever, where when you played a note, maybe a drum or bass kicked in and followed you down the keyboard. In fact, I happen to have my trusty Sk-1 here just in case we needed an example. It won't be going through the mixer, but hopefully you can still hear this. So when I play, the accompaniment changes to match the chords I played. Now, that's a pretty cheesy example, and hopefully that doesn't kind of downplay what we can do with this here, because it's a lot more powerful, obviously. But between the dog walking and the cheesy piano accompaniment, hopefully you get the gist of the live play aspect of the ARP that I'm trying to highlight here, which is you can basically control multiple units at once in a live transposition idea. So like, to give another example, I can go back to my G sharp major, play my chord progression, but then if I want to just change it up completely, I can play a C minor. And everything has to follow me. So you are in control And how you've set the parameters in each of these 4 arpeggiators dictates how they're going to follow you. So hopefully all my mixed metaphors and convoluted explanations gets across some of the power of this type of live play, live transposition feature. Now, there are other units that are capable of this sort of feature set. I mean, the elephant in the room in terms of arpeggiator comparisons is the NDLR or Noodler. I've never used one. I just know that it's another multi-arpeggiator unit. I don't know that it's capable of the same live play that I'm demonstrating here, but I do have a friend who has one. Hi, Phil. So I could probably borrow it if you wanted a side-by-side comparison. Other things, if I reach across the desk here, the OPZ, for all its issues, does allow for live transposition on the master track. You can transpose your composition via playing different chords or whatever, which is very handy. The Synthstrom Deluge, which is my unit of choice usually, has a lot of kind of these sort of features in the new, being worked on in the new community firmware. There's a MIDI transpose track, a lot of ARP improvements that get you into this kind of territory, but they're still kind of being tested or in beta or being worked on. And also, some of these devices like the OPZ and Deluge, they do a lot of other things, and you kind of want to use those features as well. You're not going to be buying those just because they can do ARPs or live transposition. That's where it's interesting to have a niche device that focuses on ARPs and that kind of live play aspect. If you had told me a couple months ago that I'd be having fun with a dedicated ARP unit, I probably wouldn't have believed you, or maybe would have been a little skeptical. But really, that kind of live aspect, I like to do live ambient sets, as I've done some videos on before, and you never have enough hands. And I think that's where the Midicake Arp or devices that can do this sort of thing come in handy, pun intended, I guess, because, you know, I've basically grown 4 other hands or 8 other hands just by playing through the ARP. Now, of course, the Midicake Arp can do more than just live play. That's just the feature that kind of drew me in the most and really made me want to dig deep and learn how to use it. You don't really need a MIDI controller at all to program in your chords. You can do it all on the unit itself via the piano octave they give you there. So what I'll do is set up a chord progression and lock that in, so then we can have something playing while I do some edits. So to do that, I press the main encoder here. And then we see we're in kind of chord chain mode. So we've got major is activated there. So that dictates what type of chord we're going to be selecting when we choose one of the notes here. So I'll do our standard G sharp major chord that we've been playing, F sharp major. Now we'll do minor and do D sharp minor, then back to major for a B major. And that's kind of what I've been playing on the Reface CP here. So if I lock that in, we've got our custom starting with G sharp major. Now I can play that, and it's going to go through that chord progression. And I can stop it whenever I want, whatever. So it just shows you don't need the MIDI controller as well. But from a live perspective, that's kind of where the magic happens for me, is playing it all live and having all those little dogs follow you down the street. But we set that chord progression up for a reason, so let's use it as a backdrop as we move back and forth between more or less complex patches on the ARP. To do that, I press load, and that takes us to our preset management screen. Our pads have changed color here, and I believe we have 12 banks of 12 patches, and a patch saves all the arpeggiation parameters for the 4 arpeggiators in one slot. So we will choose bank 2, patch 4, and this is going to be a very simple example of just these 4 units doing the exact same thing, really. So you can hear it's kind of, I guess, sonically rich as the timbres are stacking, but rhythmically bland as everything's playing the exact same time division, the exact same gate, etc. So we can make this way more interesting. In fact, you don't need this device to achieve that sound. You can do that with a key step and one of these little quadra-through MIDI boxes or something. So let's take advantage of the parameters available to us. So we'll press set to get into parameter editing mode, and now our pads have changed color again. I don't know if I've mentioned this enough, but I do really enjoy the user interface of the Midicake Arp. In fact, it's probably what's led me to using it more than I thought I would, as it's kind of just pleasant to use. I always know what mode I'm in, what I'm editing, and it seems like great care and thought has gone into the interface itself, especially when adding new features and subsequent firmware updates. It's like everything is so carefully considered, and I really appreciate that. In this case, you can see Arpeggiator 3 is lit, that's the CP here. The mode button is lit, and that's discussing what type of ARP mode we're using. So here we have ARP set up. In fact, they all are set to ARP, which we're going to change so we can differentiate it. So here, let's set CP to chord, which means it'll play kind of staccato chords. And then Nymphes will set to pad. And pad will hold the chord until the next chord arrives. We could also use drone, and that just differentiates between how the notes are held as chord changes come. But for now, pad is good enough. Okay, so let's hear how that sounds by pressing play on our sequence. So hopefully you can already hear that now we have these two units doing something slightly different than these two units, which is very helpful already. But we can take that much further very easily by also changing things like the time division. So if I'm on the Nymphes here, time is set to 4. Everything actually, like I said, is set to 4. So I can change the keys and the kick to, say, 8. Now we can use macros. I won't really get into the macros up here. You can set these to do different things at once for more access or immediacy of multiple parameters at once. But for now, we're just going to focus down here because it's a different subject to get into. And like I said, this isn't a full tutorial. But now we've got the kick and the keys set to 8ths and these guys set to 4ths. So let's play that and see how it sounds. So there you go. You're already getting a bit of richness in different rhythm. So there's stuff happening here, which is already pretty fun. Okay, let's load another patch that's got some more complex parameters set up that I can engage so you can hear how things get a little more rhythmically interesting. To start, I'm going to mute everything but the first arpeggiator, which is connected to the Volca kick. So I'll play that. You can hear there's some stuff going on already, like I believe I have bounce set differently instead of just following straight up. It's kind of bouncing up and down as it goes up through the 4 steps that I've set it to. Our time is still on 8ths. And then we can get a lot more variety pretty quickly. So first, let's go to velocity. Right now it's set to 70 kind of arbitrarily, but you'll notice on the screen here, there's a grayed out little kind of set of squares. If I press the main encoder, it changes to purple on the screen with our lights changing color here. And what's happened now is I have access to a dedicated step sequencer for the velocity parameter, which is pretty cool. Some parameters have their own step sequencer, so you can turn the velocity edit on or off for certain parameters only. So right now we're at a pattern length of 1. So it's only this step is active. So it's just going to play at that velocity of 70 that we had set. I can turn that off. It won't play at all now. But what I can do is scroll the main encoder here to increase our pattern length. And you'll see now these are lit and these two are out completely. That means we're in an 8-step pattern where these two are off. So these steps will not play basically. So let's hear that. So already you hear a bit of variety happening. So if I turn that back to 1 step, so there you go. You get some variety in our sequence just from changing the velocity pattern. And other parameters have that feature as well. Speaking of, let's go to the delay feature. So delay kind of acts like a bit of it gives a bit of a swing almost, or delays the onset of a note. I have it set to 25% here. So that would mean that under normal circumstances, this pattern would be delayed a little bit every note. But you'll see it also has a delay pattern sequencer here. So it's set to 1, but that first step is off. So you won't hear any delay. So if I play this, it'll play normal. But now if I engage that first step, everything just got a bit of a lilt. Hard to tell on its own, but if I change the pattern length of our delay sequencer to 8, there you go. You hear a little bit of kind of laziness on some of the notes there. So these two, unlike velocity where we had all but 2 active, in delay we only have 2 active. So back again. So hopefully you can hear some of the variety that can introduce. We now have velocity, pulling kind of notes in and out, and we have delay lilting certain notes only. So that's just the tip of the iceberg, really. I'm going to unmute the keys, and we're going to do the same thing for the keys. Let's see. Velocity is set. Let's set that sequence pattern length to 8. You'll see it's slightly different than the one we had for the kick. There's one more step not active. And then also, I believe I had delay on the keys as well. That was only set to 10, but only 2 steps as well. But now let's play these two together. So already they're kind of filling in gaps for each other and going a bit different in their pattern. So we're getting a bit more complex already, which is fun. Okay, now let's bring in our CP. I've got the other guys muted here. Play that sequence. It's got that stereo tremolo set pretty low, so it's kind of shifting back and forth in your headphones, but we're going to affect that as well a little later, spoiler alert. But we can do something with this chord progression via the repeat shortcut here, because we have Ratchet and Chop, and they are going to edit how certain steps play in a similar way to delay and velocity did for our keys and kick via their own little step sequencer. So if I go to Chop, we have it set to 1, but nothing's happening right now because that first step is off. And I should say I preset these patterns so that I could quickly turn them on with the dial here and didn't have to remember where I liked it. But by default, you can set however you want. I've just done this already. You can choose different patterns. You can save them. So I've just set this the way it is so it's easy for this demo super quick. So when I turn this, we'll go to 8, and this one step is active. There it is. Now it's chopped, and it's going to play multiple times within that one step. But only that step, because that's the one I made active. I could add another one, which sounds kind of cool, but we want to add a ratchet instead. So let's do that. Ratchet, we have set to 1 as well, but it's not currently on. Let's actually set it to 2 and see what happens. We'll set our pattern length again right now. Like I said, I preset this one, so I'll turn this on. There it is. There's our chop. There's our ratchet. So slightly different ways of kind of repeating a note within a step to get a bit of variety. Now, while we're talking about the CP here, let's do something else. I'll mute that again, and we can use effects. Oh, I'm still in my ratchet view, so press that to get out of that, and now press this shortcut for effects, and you see effects amount is off, and I'll page through our options here by pressing the effects shortcut a couple times. You see the effects target is octave. The effects seed is this one here. Now, this is where we get into that what is random and what isn't. The Midicake philosophy is that nothing is random. So even on the box, I believe it says no such thing as random. Yeah, I'll get it. See right here. No such thing as random. So they're really living the life of this no random philosophy, but that isn't to say you can't make things sound random. But I believe my understanding from going back and forth with them and reading the documentation is that the ethos is more, you want to be able to automate and recreate what you've done accurately every time. So there, you might want a bit of randomness in your patterns or whatever, but I think what the suggestion here is what you're looking for is more of a perceived randomness that's really just a variety that a listener won't immediately think is repetitive and boring. But with all these parameters, you can get so close to something that sounds random, but is very repeatable and intentional by how you set it up, which I kind of like. I wasn't sure about the no random thing at first, because sometimes it's just fun to put a bunch of stuff on random, hit play and see what happens. But this really puts your thought process and your consideration at the forefront. Like you're saying, I want this step delayed, I want this and this and this, and I'm going to create some randomness by maybe having my number of steps be less than, say, my other amounts, so they're not even, so things start to add up in weird ways that sound random. And that's where the seed comes in. So I can choose different seeds, and basically I look at that, and there's no way I'm going to remember that seed pattern, but it will repeat, in this case, every 2 bars. based on how I set it up, this will repeat, but it will sound somewhat random. So I've got it set to octave, and pre-mod and post-mod we won't talk about here, but they do add some power. Let's up our octave randomness. Let's start at 40 and see how we feel. What's going to happen is now the CP, the octave will jump based on this seed setting. So let's play. Let's up it a little bit. That sounds pretty subtle so far. Okay, I heard a low one. There you go. We can keep going. Higher than 100. You can go all the way to 200% actually. There you go. So now we're getting low and high octaves mixed in seemingly random sounding ways, but they're not actually random. They're based on this effects seed. And you can change the effects seed to change what you want. You can also automate a lot of this stuff. So it's like you're changing it. So you can get to random types of sounds, but you could deconstruct them and see how you got there every step of the way. So nothing's really random, but to a listener, it will sound interesting. Okay, so I belabored that too much, so let's move on. Something else you can do that's a lot of fun that we haven't touched on at all yet is modulate things. I did mention you can modulate certain aspects of these parameters for extra perceived randomness. So not only can you modulate things like velocity or, let's see, gate, octave, note offset, time division, steps. You can modulate all kinds of stuff, right? The real fun one that I found that's a recent addition in the firmware is you can modulate CC value. So we're connected via MIDI, via the Quadra through and the Midicake, and all these guys are all connected, and there's settings such that I can set a CC number for each of these arpeggiators to modulate, and it can either be one MIDI channel, so I could have the whole unit modulating 4 parameters on the reface CP, for instance, or in the case is how I've set it up now, I can go into the menu and set per track CC output. So now each track is going to output a CC number of my choosing to the MIDI channel that the track is set to. So each track can change currently 1 CC, but that gets pretty powerful. So in the case of the reface, I've got it set to tremolo rate, I believe, 151%. And there's a toggle here that's pretty convenient. I don't know why the effects doesn't have a toggle, so I can leave it just set to the percentage I like and toggle it on or off. Maybe that's a upcoming consideration, but a lot of the gripes I have with this machine, when I look at the firmware potential roadmap, a lot of them are already kind of potentially being addressed. So, I don't even want to get into things I don't like about it because it seems like they've got a roadmap already to fix a lot of stuff. But yeah, so anyway, you can, with the mod parameters, you can toggle them on or off. And in this case, I have it toggled off. I've set it up in advance. Let's toggle it on. And that's, well, I'll play it with it off first. Now I'm going to toggle it on. And if you have headphones on, this will be really obvious, but it's going to modulate the rate of the tremolo on the reface CP. But I have it set to 7 bars. So there you go. It's faster. Now it's slowing down, and it's doing this kind of parabolic shape, smooth kind of up and down. So now not only is the Midicake sending the notes, I've told it what notes I want to play, it's sending that to the CP based on the time division and steps and velocity and all these other parameters I've set, but now it's also adding an extra arm and reaching over and turning the rate knob for me. So you talk about adding hands to a live set. I've already got now, I've saved one hand here that's because I don't need to be playing these chords if I don't want, but also it's turning the rate for me and doing all kinds of other things. So hopefully you can see how powerful that can be. It's time we brought in the Nymphes. We've been kind of ignoring it through this example, so I'll play what it's doing. it's set to just pad. And this is where you get into kind of like, when is an ARP not an ARP? Because really what this is kind of chord. It's playing one chord every bar. One full chord, one pad every bar. But that adds a layer to everything, right? So this is now we're kind of setting up almost more sequences than we are arpeggiation in this case. But we can do that same MIDI sequencing modulation for the Nymphes. And again, I've set that up in advance. So we've got 100% targeted CC value. Shape is this kind of upward triangle, 1.5 bars. Let's turn our toggle on. You'll hear what it is. So what's happening now, the noise slider has been modulated through MIDI by the Midicake Arp. So now the noise is increasing and decreasing every 1.5 bars. So it won't necessarily be in the same time as what the Nymphes pad was playing before. It just adds a bit of variety. So now if I bring back what we've got going on here, now we do have the same modulation toggles set up for the keys and kick for a CC each. They're just not active yet. So to skip ahead, let me just load a patch where I've turned those on and set them up or whatever. And now I will mute everything but the keys and you'll be able to hear what it's doing. Mute the kick as well. So hopefully you can hear it's now modulating the cutoff frequency. And now if I enable the kick, it's getting more or less staccato because the CC in this case is modulating the amp decay. So it's tightening or loosening the kind of the kick length. So now we bring them all together. And there you go. That's kind of our final walk for the dogs, I guess, in this case. The leashes have been set to the various parameter lengths that I want to set them to. And now everything's doing something a little different. We're not necessarily even into ARP territory with a couple of them. Things are pseudo-random. And, you know, the Midicake Arp in this case is playing a preset chord progression that I've programmed into it, but we can still take advantage of live play if we want. So we've grown a lot of hands to reach our various MIDI knobs, but let's see what happens. We go through our custom scale here. And now let's say I want to do something different with it. Let it come around again. C sharp minor, A sharp minor, G sharp. So a companion chord progression to the one we just had. And then I can go back to the one we played before if I want. And everything follows. So there you go. I interrupted the preset chord progression with my own live playing and then took it in a totally different direction. So hopefully, you know, the power of that from a live musician perspective where you don't have enough hands to do much, hopefully that's obvious now, a bit more so after this long-winded demonstration. Now, a word of warning, based on the workflow I just demonstrated there, one thing that happens when I switch to the MIDI controller is it erases the chord chain that I had set up in this menu here. Now, that wasn't my intention by playing live over here that I wanted to erase or overwrite that chord chain. So I remember being a bit confused the first time I saw that happen. It's just a caution that that's the workflow at the moment as of version 7 of the firmware, that your chord chain will be overwritten if you switch to live play. But in my case, I really wanted to just use live play anyway, and I was really only using the chord chain to demonstrate that that was possible if you didn't want to use a MIDI controller. So just know that they're not necessarily intended to work in tandem. As of version 7 of the firmware, I'm not sure what they have planned in the future, but it seems like they've addressed a lot of other things in the 7 firmware revisions they've had so far. So who knows, they may change how chord progressions are saved. But in any case, I'm going to keep the dogs walking for a bit because I've been having a lot of fun with this. So stick around, or let me know if you have any questions. Obviously, I've been really enjoying the ARP, and it will be featured in other videos. I have some ideas of things I'd like to do with it, or just some fun I've been having with it. If you have questions about it, let me know. Or if you have one and you're curious about things, or if you have a noodler and it can do certain things as well that this can't, or whatever, let me know what you think about the ARP or this demonstration or this idea of live play while I continue taking my dogs out.